Good evening.
Sorry.
Sorry, I've been told to nestle this against my beard. So, let's get this up. So, those who don't know me, I'm Simon. I've been working as a freelance photographer for about 6 years now. And the last year of them being based here in Belfast. Previously I worked in Aberdeen and in Manchester. I generally do commercial work. I do a lot of architectural work, interiors, very nice houses, very expensive houses, things like that. I do a wee bit of food work as well, which is great, although I never really seem to get to eat it a lot. And I do a wee bit of travel work as well, which is amazing, which is like the most fun you can have. I said I wouldn't be showing my holiday photos, but I'm sorry. I started already. And last year, I do a fair bit of documentary work for artists and craftsmen as well, documenting their process. From that last year, Andy asked me to take some photos at Build. So some of you have seen me dotting around, taking photos at him. There's Big Jeff. Jacqueline, the guys, before the drink. And I go, some people shortening maxes. And yes. So, Chris initially asked me to do this talk. It wasn't long after the Christmas one. And I thought, well, a 10-minute talk, I can do that. That'll be like my first talk. I can manage that. There'll be a topic, there'll be other people there. I can kind of hide in the middle of that, when everyone goes to the bathroom or the bar. And if it's crap, no one will notice and no one will remember because there'll be lots of awesome talks. So I was speaking to Chris, and the conversation was going on, and he didn't seem to be mentioning anybody else's name. So I was like, Chris, who else is speaking? And he said, it's just you. Shit.
I said it's just you, but you'll be great.
Yes, you did. You did break the news very gently. You were like, yeah, it would be great. And I was like, what's the topic? Is there a topic? He's like, no, just talk about whatever you want. It'll be fine. Shit. So, if you take one thing away tonight, it is, if you're lacking inspiration to do a talk, don't talk about inspiration. It's not a good idea. Not a good idea. I was struggling. I had ideas of what I wanted to say, and I sent them to Chris, and he put them up on the website, so I definitely have to talk about that now. So I did all the things that you do when you're looking for inspiration. I went for walks, long walks, to clear my head. I went for runs. I did other things and didn't think about it for a while. I talked to other people, hoping that they would be able to help me. I drank some whiskey. Drank some more whiskey, and then some more, and yeah, so I'm still waiting for that inspiration to kick in. So instead, I'm going to tell you a bunch of stories, because I like stories, about other people and other things and other places. I come from a photography background. I initially studied industrial design at university, so although I find other photographers and other photographers' work incredibly inspiring, I generally tend to find a lot of my inspiration comes from outside of photography. And when I think about what inspires me most, I actually think it's stories. Stories about what people do, and their lives, and how they've achieved their goals and their dreams. I'd much rather someone told me a story than look at a beautifully lit photo of a celebrity. My dad's full of photo stories. He was a mechanic in the Navy. He joined up when he was 15 and served 25 years before leaving when I was about 6. By the time he was in his 20s, he probably travelled pretty much most of the world, spent a lot of time in the Far East, and seen more sights than most people twice, 3 times his age. Around the time I was born, he was serving on the HMS Phoebe, which is a Leander-class frigate. Phoebe was the first frigate to operate a Westland Lynx helicopter, which is that you can see on the back there. And it was this helicopter my dad mainly worked on. He was kind of in charge of ensuring that it was operating properly, doing tests and things like that. And the ship was also equipped with a towed array sonar, which is a 5 kilometre long cable dropped out the back of the ship and it's studded with hydrophones at regular intervals. And these hydrophones you can use to detect and calculate the position of sound sources. Phoebe was essentially a submarine hunter and go out and play cat and mouse with Russian subs in real life war game. So you have to think this was in the 80s, this was the height of the Cold War, and basically they were just chasing submarines up around the Arctic Sea. When I was younger, my dad's stories were mainly about Hong Kong, Singapore, the Far East, the food, the sights, and they would go out there and obviously electronic goods were 60s, 70s were incredibly cheap and you would save up loads of money when you're at sea, not a lot to spend money on, and you're kind of stuck in a tin can for months at a time. So by the time he got out there, he'd have maybe 2-3 months pay and he would buy reel-to-reel tape recorders, which were the price of a car back here. And he bought his first camera when he was out there, a Pentax Spotmatic, which is the first camera, one of the first cameras to have through the lens metering. You come back with bales of silk, things like that, just mad shit. Just come back on the ship, and generally the customs would let them through because they were naval, they would get checked, but they would just come through anyway. As I got older, he had new stories, more about the stuff he did later on, which was kind of secret, kind of a bit dodgy, and the stuff about chasing submarines. The really crazy stuff is his best story, my favourite, is the time he had to do tests in a helicopter at night during the middle of a really bad storm up around the Arctic, and they took the helicopter off and they got detected by a Russian radar station. They got fired on by the Russians. You can tell when the radar hit beeps, just going like an alien. You've got the thing. And it beeps. And you can tell when a missile's been fired because the beep will glitch slightly as the tracking system switches from the radar base station to the missile's radar. You got the glitch, so they knew they'd been fired on. And they'd used all the countermeasures, the chaff, all the other stuff. And their last resort is the storm was so bad that they flew the helicopter. This was a Lynx helicopter with, I think it holds about 5 or 6 people. It's not a small bit of kit. Flew it down the barrel of a wave. So you've got the wave and the helicopter straight down the middle of it, so the missiles impacted on the side of the wave. Then they didn't have any fuel. They couldn't turn the lights on to find the ship, so they had to fly around until they found the ship in the middle of the sheets. That's his favourite story. That's the one he pulls out whenever he's out with my mates in the pub. And they kind of look at him in awe and amazement, which is hilarious because he's like, he's like action hero. Whoa. Bruce Willis or even Steven Seagal, but my dad looks like a fucking hobbit. So it's very difficult for me to picture that in my head. And then now he has other stories now, which he's only really starting to tell now. The time he was in the Falklands War, which was a very, very difficult story for him to tell. But all these stories that he tells, the Falklands have always seemed the most real. They're the ones that have got the small details. The other ones are kind of where these things happen and then that's it. But the Falklands stories are also the ones that have these tiny little details. The time they're under attack for hours from Argentinian missiles, and all they could find afterwards to eat was Mars bars and Guinness. So when the next attack came in, they were absolutely pissed and didn't really know what was happening because they were on Guinness. He also kept a diary when he was in the Falklands, which lists all the books he read and nothing else. There's no other information other than the books he was reading. These really weird, mundane things. And these details are fascinating. It's details that inspired me to pick up a camera on what I hope they managed to capture. The details come from nowhere. They're surprising, yet necessary. They're what makes all stories, good, bad, happy or sad, worth listening to. It can bring pleasure to both the listener and the storyteller. And that random piece of information, that little brief aside, that bit of background, can sometimes mean almost as much as the story itself. So another story of massively Earth. In the mid-80s, so it's actually just been after my dad came out of the Navy, my mum and dad bought a timeshare in the heart of Perthshire Highlands, at Loch Rannoch. It's situated about 20 miles west of Pitlochry, home to the smallest distillery in Scotland, the Dredor. Not the best whiskey, but they do a nice range of special editions and things which are good to try. And about 20 miles northwest of Aberfeldy, which is where J.K. Rowling lives. The area is surprisingly remote. Despite being relatively close to these places, it takes about an hour's drive to get to them. And the loch is bordered on its west end by Rannoch Moor, which is, as most of you probably know, it's an incredibly desolate place, not a place to go and get lost in. The loch itself is approximately 9 miles long, and it forms a substantial part of a huge hydroelectric power scheme. I'm going to have to read this because I can't remember the full details of this. There's a total of 9 power stations stretched between Rannoch, Pitlochry and Dalwhinnie. Water flows from Rannoch Moor down to the River Gower before passing through the Gower Dam and into Loch Rannoch itself. From Rannoch, the water flows to Loch Tom, Loch Arrochty, before finally arriving at the man-made Loch Fascally in Pitlochry, with its very small distillery. And also there is a very famous fish ladder, which allows the salmon to pass up river to spawn. By the time the water reaches Pitlochry, it may have passed through 5 power stations, generating a total of 245 megawatts of power. It'll come as no surprise, I find Rannoch incredibly beautiful, inspiring. I've been going there, I'm 32, 25 years. I've been going there nearly every year when I make the trip. It's miles from nowhere, there's no mobile signal. I was disgusted that you put broadband into the lodge a couple of years ago, which is amazing. It's a place to go and get away from everything, but you can have amazing adventures there, and you can swim in the log, kayak on the log, mountain biking, go walking, all the usual stuff like that. Its peacefulness allows you for those moments of quiet reflection. You just sit and look at the log for hours on end. That's not particularly insightful. Beautiful place, beautiful things, lovely, very nice. Something else about Rannoch that I want to talk about, and that is the big fuck off mountain at the bottom of the river. This is Schiehallion. It's a beautiful meadow with a pretty interesting history. It's got a special place in my heart. When I was a kid, it's the most mountainy mountain I'd ever seen. It is like a classic kid's drawing of a mountain. It's like a perfect cone, and it's not particularly high. It's not that high. It looks pretty high. It's very impressive because there's not many mountains around it. It kind of stands by itself, and it's 1,083 meters tall, which is joint 58th biggest Munro. So only the 58th tallest mountain in Scotland. So not hugely tall. It's not a particularly difficult climb. It's got a good path, and the conical shape is actually on from one side. It's actually got quite a broad flank, so it's quite a not particularly steep climb. But the summit can disappear for days in the clouds. You won't see it, and all of a sudden it will appear in sunrise. And it more than lives up to its Gaelic name. In Gaelic it means fairy hill of the Caledonians, which is a bit gay, but for its other nickname, which is the Constant Storm. But its regular shape made it suitable for another purpose. Charles Mason's Schiehallion experiment. an 18th century experiment to calculate the mean density of the Earth. This is going to be a sciencey bit. I'm afraid I'm not Brian Cox, so I actually don't really know what this means, to be honest. The basic experiment was that something that's really, really big and has a lot of mass, like a mountain, should exert a small gravitational pull. If you do some readings from the stars, and then you take a pendulum and you take a measurement from one side of the mountain and see how far the pendulum deflects. You take a measurement from another side of the other side of the mountain and see how far that pendulum deflects. Using that, and working out the mass of the mountain, you should be able to work out the mass of the Earth somehow. Obviously, the regular shape of Schiehallion meant that it was a lot easier to calculate the mass of the mountain. So, it being isolated from the other hills meant that they wouldn't have any effect over the pendulum as well. It would generally be the only deflection would come from that mountain, and it was reasonably accessible as well. So work began in earnest in 1774 when he built some observatories and a bothy to accommodate scientists and the equipment. The task of surveying the mountain fell to Charles Hutton, who was a mathematician and surveyor, but his work was greatly hampered by the Scottish weather, and it took nearly 2 years for him to calculate and complete this task. To calculate the volume of the mountain, Hutton divided it into vertical slices, and he figured he would calculate the volume of each of these slices individually and then add them all together at the end to get the total volume of Schiehallion. He had thousands of points and bearings to work through. So to simplify this process, he also drew horizontal lines across corresponding points of the same height. This meant you could easily see the heights and slices through the mountain. That was the first animation I'd ever done in Keynote. Do you like it? It's good? No? Okay, fine. So this sort of lines also revealed something else. On relatively flat or gently inclined terrain, these lines were far apart before coming closer together on much steeper terrain. At a glance, these lines could give a rapid impression of the terrain that made up Schiehallion, and Hutton had invented, completely by accident, contour lines. Now, what we use as a standard measure to depict terrain on maps. But this isn't the greatest scientific discovery of all time. It's useful, but there's been far more important things discovered. I love these sorts of stories. The accidental discovery, the idea that started out as one thing, before suddenly taking a left turn and becomes something completely different. The mistake. There's so many things that have been discovered by mistake. Tarmacadam, rubber for tires, Viagra, LSD, so many things were discovered completely by accident. Science is full of these sort of things, and after all, experiments are just that, experimentation, trying something new and seeing what happens. If anyone has read Bill Bryson's Brief History of Nearly Everything, you'll find many of these similar sort of stories along with the Schiehallion experiment. It's a much more entertaining version of what I've just told you. It's full of a lot of these discoveries were done in the Victorian times. There's a lot of amateur and trained scientists running around the countryside, going on expeditions, investigating everything, whatever they wanted to do. Their enthusiasm was amazing. They seemed to cover completely disparate subjects. They would range from physics to biology to chemistry to geology, and there'd be one person who'd just have interest in all of this and try and learn as much as he possibly could. The curiosity and exploration into different fields of study allowed many of them to make amazing leaps of imagination and insight, overturning conventions which were held in fields previously, and ideas which are set in stone. The same is true when being creative, learning to embrace the happy accident, or letting go of an idea when it fails and trying something new is only the start. We should also look back and reflect on what have we done. Richard Feynman, the Nobel laureate physicist, poses two questions when reading a judgment about a new idea. What can you explain that you didn't set out to explain? And what did you discover that you didn't set out to discover? Whilst Hutton didn't abandon the experiment in Schiehallion, he did find out the mass of the Earth. It's 4,500 kilograms per cubic meter, and that has only been adjusted in modern times to 5,500 kilograms per cubic meter, but that is with a 20% margin of error, so even with that, you're still pretty close. Strangely enough, actually, Newton, in one of Newton's diaries, he scribbled in a margin, like as an aside, that the mass of the Earth was 6,000 kilograms per cubic meters. No working or anything like that. So within those margins of errors, Newton's guess is just as accurate as people who did all these experiments. So once Hutton didn't abandon experiments, he was aware enough of what he was doing to realise that he'd actually discovered something that he didn't set out to discover. That explained something that he didn't set out to explain. Sometimes taking an approach requires the time and space to be able to fully investigate these sudden avenues of inspiration. Other times it just requires an awareness and a question in nature. Both of these can be difficult to do when under the pressures of professional bill-paying work and deadlines. Many of those Victorian scientists were ministers or from privileged backgrounds who had the time and financial backing to be able to spend time and money to carry out their experiments. Hence the benefits of setting yourself personal projects can never be underestimated. Giving yourself the freedom to explore ideas all of your own and in your own time and at your own leisure. There's been numerous articles on doing personal work, but I find photographer Jake Stangels to be one of the best for spotting creatives from all backgrounds, both in terms of developing inspiration, but also the drive you need to achieve your goals. Here's a wee quote from the man himself. Shooting personal work is the easiest and hardest thing you'll ever do. Easy because all you have to do is head out with your camera. Hard because you have to head out with your camera and shoot photos. Shoot constantly, make mistakes, get messy. Develop your own personal projects. It's okay to not finish them if you realise you're not into it after some time, as long as you pick another one up. This shooting process will help you figure out what you gravitate towards shooting, in what style you like to shoot in, what your strengths and weaknesses are, and how to capitalise on the former and strengthen the latter. How you behave in certain situations and what kind of photographer you are. There is no other way to discover these things, and the process of shooting personal work is totally, utterly fundamental to your photographic development. There is no way around it. Over time, obviously that was very, very photography based, but I think this applies to almost any creative and problems, especially problem solving pursuits. Over time, this will form a beautiful feedback loop. The more projects you do, the more curious you get. The more inspired you get, the more projects you do. The more curious you get, the more inspired you get, the more projects you do, and so on. And personal work doesn't just have to be confined to your chosen profession. Build it around your hobbies, around your friends or family. Whilst we don't have to be a polymath Victorian scientist, or even James Franco, actor, poet, model, beautiful man. Having many interests engenders a greater sense of curiosity and makes us more open to discovering and embracing the happy accident. The phrase "do one thing well" is thrown about a lot, frequently by people who seem to do many things well. But it is true, but it doesn't mean you can't do a few things okay to make that one thing even better. Starting out as a photographer, I didn't really have any direction. I definitely wasn't doing what I just said to do. I wasn't doing personal projects. I was kind of drifting. I didn't really know what I wanted to do in photography other than that I wanted to take photos. A lot of my early work was documenting graffiti and street artists in Manchester or most of my friends. Even at the time I didn't realise this was documentary work. I just understood it as I'm taking pictures of my mates kind of thing. There was again no real plan. It was just something that I was doing for fun in my own time. Doing that, I also took a lot of pictures of a lot of walls, so it was perhaps inevitable that I ended up doing some architectural work. But even that was an accident. A friend of a friend was a picture editor of wallpaper. They needed someone who needed a photographer in Manchester quickly, and that turned out to be me. And from that, I started doing restaurants, and from doing restaurants, I started taking pictures of food. I never really planned any of that. I was still drifting, still not sure what I was doing. and definitely not doing, again, any of the personal work thing. In the summer of 2008, though, I was asked to document an artist residency at the Stonehenge Riverside Project. And Stonehenge Riverside Project is a collaboration between 5 British universities. It aims to unravel the development of the prehistoric landscape surrounding Stonehenge. And the landscape around Stonehenge is fascinating. You have the henge itself, which is in some ways actually the least interesting part of the landscape. There's a Stonehenge, there's also a wood henge, or the post hole from a wood henge. There's an avenue which leads from Stonehenge to the wood henge. There's Durrington Walls, which is another part of the wood henge. There's also a thing called the cursus, which no one has any idea what that was for. It's a raised circuit, it looks a bit like a racetrack, and it was originally covered in chalk or limestone. And it was called a cursus because they presumed it was an ancient Roman racetrack, but it actually predates that and is actually one of our earliest monumental structures in the UK. But again, no one has any idea what it was for, and they have more idea of what Stonehenge was for than the cursus. This was the final year of the project's fieldwork, and would be the second year that the artists were in residency. The scope of the dig was vast, massive, and the excavations took place over 4 weeks, pulling in archaeology students from all 5 universities, essentially cheap slave labour for 4 weeks. As well as digging within the Stonehenge Circle for the first time, there were excavations on the avenue, the cursus, a long barrow within the cursus, the field to the west of the circle, as well as an excavation down by the riverside which revealed the remains of another henge in the area. Stonehenge is a bit of a crazy place, as an understatement. There's the stones themselves, which are incredible and attract so many tourists. It's also an army training ground. The whole area is crisscrossed with tank roads. It'd be nothing to wake up in the morning and see paratroopers flying overhead and jumping out of helicopters, Chinooks, Apache gunships flying overhead. It's just generally, combined with the stones and this happening, the area has an already weird feel to it. Never mind, at the same time, there was an ongoing jury protest led by Terry. This is Terry Dobney, Archsteward and Keeper of the Stones. Not these stones, another set of stones, but he's very possessive about Stonehenge stones as well. And a bloke who thinks he's King Arthur. Literally, he thinks he's King Arthur. But he lives in Caravan. Besides Stonehenge. Yes. So there was a protest going on at the same time, mainly because of the excavation within the walls within the confines of Stonehenge. They were re-excavating a post hole where human remains had been buried from a previous dig. They were taking the remains, they were going to study them and then rebury them. So the Druids, they didn't appear very happy. They seemed a bit angry, a bit upset. But to be fair, it all seemed a little bit for show. They didn't seem to worry about having tea and donuts with the archaeologists, beer, talking on mobile phones. Yeah, actually I think that just went to be White Snake. So generally the whole place is this bizarre atmosphere. It is just so hard to explain and get over. But what struck me the most, though, through all this, through this craziness, bearing in mind these were students, they were working for, they weren't being paid, they were there for privilege digging on Stonehenge. But the archaeologists, they were so enthusiastic, so happy to help. They were just incredible. Archaeology, I'm sure most of you have a big idea of the process of archaeology from time to time and things like that, but it is a mind-numbing, hard and tedious job. Before you even break ground, there would be aerial photos, surveying, geophys, all that kind of stuff to work out where they were actually going to put a trench in. Once they'd worked out where they wanted the trench to do, they had to negotiate with the National Trust, English Heritage and any other farmers or landowners where they were going to put the dig. So there'd be a bit of compromise about where they could dig and for how long. Once all that got settled, the trench would be mapped out with pegs and string and spray paint sometimes just to and different colours, but even that, there was problems with even doing that. Once excavation starts, topsoil is removed from the trench and then sifted through. Each barrel load needs to be traced back to where it came from in the trench, so it'll be given a grid reference. It'll then go across to where it's been sifted, and any finds then need to be catalogued, tagged, and bagged, and paperwork filled out and approved. It is incredibly boring, tedious work. They're on their hands. If they're not doing manual labour, which is probably the better part of it, they're on their hands and knees scraping with trowels. Every archaeologist has their own trowel. They're very possessive about them. So they're on their knees, scraping away, going through very, very fine details. And then these use either string or spray paint to mark out locations within the trench of interest. With a project this big, there are literally thousands and thousands of finds which need to be recorded on computer or just by paper, and then they're bagged up and they're put in various containers depending on what they are, and then cleaned up, all done by hand. And by the end of it, with a project this big, there are literally thousands of finds, and the site quickly begins to look like a hugely complex OCD version of CSI. But throughout all this, through the sun and the rain, and there's a lot of rain, they're also camping the whole time. There's 2 shifts, they're there for the whole thing lasts 4 weeks, and there's 2 shifts for 2 weeks. But they're camping in a massive communal campsite for these 2 weeks, with 1 or 2 showers for 2 showers for males, 2 showers for females. They are beside a pub, so I suppose that's one bonus, but it's not great, to be fair. But they all remain incredibly enthusiastic, and because of the area, there's been lots and lots of tourists coming down, and they were so happy to explain to the tourists what was going on, what they were doing, take them around all the different sites and help them. They also loved having the artists around too. At first they were a little unsure of some of the artists' work. Janet Hodgson dressed up as a Victorian archaeologist and pretended she was time travelling. To be fair, I'm still unsure of what she was doing as well. Bill and Gaia decided that Stonehenge was a giant theremin and made a video performance art piece inside the stones, which got us banned from Stonehenge, which was a little bit sad. But as they got more comfortable having the artists around, they began to discuss the work and contribute their own ideas and their own insights into the dig. Much of archaeology is a form of storytelling and interpretation. You have no one set of facts, something came out of the ground at this place and it's probably dated from this time. But beyond that, everything else is made up, essentially. It's based on experience, but it can never be the actual fact. So everything is completely open to interpretation, and many stories emerge. And one of the artists, Mark Anstey, based his work on this. He came up with his own theory for what the cursus was for. He decided that it was a giant graveyard, and that bodies would be laid out to be pecked when they were dead. They'd be laid out to be pecked clean by birds and things. He felt that his theory was no more inaccurate or accurate than many of the archaeologists' theories. His ideas were entirely based on fact, and he was to say that he was wrong. He also ran around with flags a lot, so that probably reduced his credibility as a scientific person. But it was great watching the arguments and discussion. The rigorous science of archaeology coming up against what is the what ifs and why nots questioning Mark's art, inspiring him to come up with even more crazy, possibly not, ideas. And it's talking to the archaeologists that helped me find some direction for my own work as well. I started off trying to capture all the mad stuff that was happening all around me, but quickly got overwhelmed. I was trying to do everything and be everywhere, but I really did not seem to be getting anything that captured the experience or the sense of place of Stonehenge. One night, the artist did a brief presentation to the archaeologist about their work so far, and I showed some of my photos alongside their work in progress. Afterwards, we were talking to a few of the guys where they mentioned a few photos they'd taken of their tools and their equipment and all the little odds and ends that they get to use and dig. And they said to me, I realised that how cool a lot of this stuff looked. They were so familiar with it that they'd never realised the beauty and the interest behind it. Whereas for me, I have a thing for tools and machinery. I love all that kind of stuff. So I'd actually kind of stopped myself from taking photos of that. After that chat, I realised that what I'd been doing it all backwards. I've been missing out on the details. I've been essentially telling the story that the archaeologists already knew. They knew about the dig, that was their lives. But they were so familiar that they missed all these little things. So I showed their work in a new light to them, and I find a little bit of inspiration and familiar. I might have been a new pair of eyes in their life, but it was their advice that showed me, that shone a new light on my own work. So, in summary, where can we find inspiration? It's all around. It's in a random comment, a happy accident. It's the details of the story. It's in the familiar and in the new. We just need to give ourselves the time and the space to learn how to watch out for when it comes, to put ourselves in situations where it can flourish. We're working and speaking to others, by trying new things and keeping an open mind. So if things are difficult and you're getting down, most of all, don't dismiss things out of turn. Be curious, and I won't be in that most unlikely place that inspiration will strike.